All right, guys, I'm going to go refill my coffee cup and then we'll do this. All right, good morning, good morning. I see Steve Rodemeyer. Steve's got first blood this morning. I see Pitt, Danny's with us, and Danny gave me a call yesterday about tomorrow evening, so the meeting at Amici is on. That's... Oh, disabled veteran. Good morning. You distracted me with the weird dancing shadow cat emoji, I think. But yeah, so the meeting at Amici is on for tomorrow night. First Thursday, GOP at the pizza joint, which is a good time. Come on out. I see the Fit Life with Danny's with us. Good morning, Danny. GCM says FTP and good morning to you, my brother. And there's Trish. Good morning, good morning. So, and I already said good morning to disabled veteran, I believe. And yeah, me too, bro. Me too. So I'll go ahead and say it for you. And you have what apologies you may need. This is going to be dry this morning. I'll try to crack a joke here and there, but this is going to be some dry material. We're going to talk about two pretty high-level philosophical concepts. And Sword Major says, "Am I chopped beef?" No, but you had not yet appeared in the comments because you must have made comments before I was actually live. So this is the first one I'm seeing from you, Dad. Yeah, if I haven't said good morning to you, it's because whatever comments you made were in the chat on YouTube or Facebook or wherever before I'm actually live. Those don't get aggregated into my chat stream here, so I can't see you until I'm actually live. So yesterday I talked about the artificial intelligence chatbot phenomenon, which I'm sure many of you have noticed has been dominating trends and algorithmic suggestions on all kinds of major social media platforms. I actually keep a couple of different YouTube channels. If I'm watching YouTube signed in as the Brushfire Mind, it's all politics, news, social commentary, and that kind of stuff. And then I have another YouTube channel for East Atlanta Video, and I curate my subscriptions between them. So on EAV, all the suggested material is stuff about camera equipment, industry trends, creativity, marketing, that kind of stuff. And then I have another one that's just for music, right? And I very intentionally and carefully curate what the algorithm is going to feed me on those separate channels, because I want, that's what I want, is I want to know what's going on in this industry and in this industry and in this industry, and I don't want to have to go digging for it. And I say all that to say that across all of those different carefully curated positions, the artificial intelligence stuff, the chat GPT, the what's it called, I forget the name of it now, but the one that's used for AI generated imaging, all that kind of stuff, has been popping up in all of those different carefully curated algorithmic feeds. So it's, just deeply pervasive throughout the entire ecosystem of social media, and let's face it, the zeitgeist. The current zeitgeist is obsessed with artificial intelligence. So, as that has been going forward and developing, we've been talking about it a bit amongst ourselves. It's been a topic of conversation on the infamous thread, which, as you guys know, I will never actually show on this channel, but I am going to reference a bit of it. And I'm afraid that what I have to say this morning is not exactly good news, but we need to dig into it. It's something that everybody needs to understand quite clearly in order to be, at least to some degree, prepared for what's to come, as it were. And so from the infamous thread, I had this question from one of our frequent viewers, who unfortunately isn't with us yet this morning. I'm sure he's going to pick it up later this afternoon. But Legion asked, hard question. Take great thinkers throughout history and ask, what if they had been born as our contemporaries? Excuse me. Would they retain the excellence of their minds amid our broken world, or would they be susceptible towards becoming shit-lib NPCs like the rest of the gutter trash at the universities? Does a brilliant mind retain its independence regardless of the age, or are the creation of brilliant minds a product of their age? And he goes on to say, Chris, you have a degree in philosophy. Answer the question, please. And says, because if the Calvinists were right, we have a serious problem. And he's not wrong there. I almost pushed the button. I almost let you see the thread. We don't share the infamous thread. We share snippets from the infamous thread. So here's my take. We're going to talk this morning about Strauss-Howe generational theory, and we're going to talk about the Kierkegaardian leveling process. So first, let me summarize these concepts for you. The Strauss-Howe generational theory posits that there are these 80-year cycles, which are most easily understood, even though it's not a perfect comparison or a perfect analogy, but you're all familiar with the meme, hard times create weak men, strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Right? That's a very basic summarization of the Strauss-Howe generational theory, but it essentially talks about this kind of ebb and flow of cultural norms and the habit of the zeitgeist to generate conflict between people, which in turn creates a new zeitgeist, normally of peace and prosperity. The last beginning right? The last first turning. He refers to the 80-year cycle, which he refers to as generational or historical seculum, is divided into what he calls 4 turnings. And the last uptick positive turning was the end of World War II, where we experienced unparalleled prosperity, right? Suddenly the economy's growing, we're back in peacetime, everything's going well. And then there's a shift. And that shift, and this is the good times creating weak men. And just to be clear here, when I say weak men in this context, I almost but not quite exclusively mean communists. And that's going to be more important toward the end of this conversation, but remember that weak men are communists, and vice versa. Communists are weak men. But understand that weak men are a threat in mass. The Bible tells us that the weak shall inherit the earth. That is not a prophecy. That is not a prediction. It's a threat. It is an injunction against the toleration of weak men. Because what weak men are, they are a threat precisely because they're incompetent. They cannot do for themselves. And so instead of achieving, instead of working, instead of earning, instead of building a family and a life and a prosperity, they gather together in groups, in large groups, in armed groups. And we have a few different names for these kinds of groups. Sergeant Major reminds me, it's the meek, not the weak. And there's not a significant distinction. These meek men, these weak men, gather together in groups where they can use violence by outnumbering strong men to take from the strong man what he produces and share it among themselves. There are several problems with this, and we have many names for these kinds of groups. We call them gangs, we call them religions, cults, and governments. These groups of the meek who assail strong men, they see the strong man has worked and earned and produced and grown prosperous and happy. He has had children, is raising a family, is building a life. And he produces enough to feed himself and a family, and maybe even have a little excess which he can trade for other things that he's not producing, where someone else needs what he produces. Basic commerce. When the weak horde comes, when the horde of the meek comes to take from the strong man, what they take from him is everything he has and is less than they need. Because it takes such a large number of these armed meek to subjugate and rob the strong man, that what they take from him, even though it is his entire life, is not sufficient to feed their masses. And so they have to go forward and find more strong men to rob. That's why the weak men create hard times. By consuming without producing, they create more scarcity. They increase by that the demand on resource and the value of the resource, which further increases the incentive of men who have not yet determined whether they are strong or weak to join the horde. We've talked on this show many times before about the mob score, right? There's going to be one knucklehead, one psychopath whose mob score is 0, which means that person is willing to just run up to a store and throw a brick through the window for no reason whatsoever. And then all it takes is a handful of people whose mob score is 1, where they see a nut job throw a brick through a window, and 3 or 4 or 5 of them come and start throwing bricks with him. And all of a sudden, the more reasonable people whose mob score is higher, their mob score gets overcome by that crowd. And the bigger it gets, the more likely people are to join it. And this is how the meek shall inherit the earth. Right? As this continues, as this goes forward, we look at the Strauss-Howe theory, and it says that basically the response to that is going to be some kind of outgrowth of liberty, and that eventually just people being free. I'm drastically simplifying this, okay? But it gets you to the next conflict, the next war. According to the predictive model of the Strauss-Howe generational theory, we're due to go into the next period of post-crisis prosperity somewhere around the year 2028. Right? Now, let's bring that back around to Kierkegaard and the leveling process. Kierkegaard talks about this thing that he calls the leveling process. And the example he uses is an ice skater, actually. You have a crowd of people that gather around to watch the figure skater on the ice, and she's beautiful, she's amazing, she's the most incredible thing you've ever seen. And at first, they gather and they say, look there. There is a person who is extraordinary. There is a person who is exceptional. There is a person who has become something special. And then somebody in the crowd says, I could do that. If. I could have been this special person if I had chosen to pursue this activity, but I didn't. I had different interests. She's not that special. This is just the thing that she chose to do. There's nothing magical or good about her. It's just that she chose to do that. I totally could have done the same thing if I wanted to. I didn't want to. I could have done the same thing if. And eventually, that becomes the way that everyone understands everything. And suddenly, no one is special. Many of you, I hope, have seen the film The Incredibles. You're right, animated film, superheroes in a post-superhero world where superheroing has been outlawed, right? And there's a conversation in there. There are actually several brilliant conversations in there. Mr. Incredible complaining and getting mad about the participation trophy and saying, why do we keep looking for more ways to celebrate mediocrity? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a question that we need to ask ourselves every day. Every single iteration of the celebration of mediocrity should be tamped out at the first chance that it raises its ugly head. It is a threat to your life. Right? And then there's something later on where they're telling the son, because he has superpowers, he's super fast, he can't use his superpowers to play sports. And his mom tells him everybody's special, and he says, if everybody's special, that's just another way to say nobody's special. And he's absolutely right. So the problem with these two theories in conjunction is there's a great deal of truth to both of them. And more frighteningly, they are both in operation in tandem. So what does that mean? That means that over time, I want you to think back and look at the good times and the hard times, the good times and the bad times, the highest prosperities and the lowest sinks into poverty, right? For example, right now, we're going through a recession in this country. It is by the numbers not dissimilar to the Great Depression as far as levels of inflation, things of that nature. Now, we happen to have a very good, theoretically, a very good unemployment rate by comparison, but the time period is similar, right? We're in that Depression era. You know, it's a recession, not quite a depression, sort of maybe, but the point is, it's not. You can feel it, right? Yeah, eggs cost too much, gas is too high, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard for some people to find work right now because the unemployment rate is so low. That kind of stuff is going on, but you can definitely feel kind of in the air about it. People are angry. People are uncomfortable. People are mad that their eggs cost too much, that their gas costs too much, right? But it's not the same thing as the Great Depression, right? We don't suddenly have people selling their children to the circus to be prostitutes like that, right? It is not the same thing as the Great Depression. It is a less severe bad time. But will the less adverse experience of this less severe bad time not have the additional consequence, as I think we can see with our eyes currently, the additional consequence of generating less stronger men? So the thing that terrifies me about this is every time that we go through one of these turnings, one of these hard times, weak men, good times, strong men turnings, the hard times are not as hard because the good times were so much better. So you go back to the good times period preceding the Great Depression, and you've got the Roaring '20s. You've got meteoric rises in industrial development, in the generation of wealth, in the rise of the prosperity of the American citizen, right? And it was glorious. And then it crashed. And it crashed hard. It crashed incredibly hard. And what came out of the Great Depression was the greatest generation. A generation that included warfighters that I can't even discuss without getting misty. And that gave us a war that was horrifying. I've been to war. A modern war. It's a very different creature. Right? Hunting and tracking and stalking and killing terrorists is a very, very different creature than trench warfare with mustard gas and napalm. So I've been to a war. I have not been to that war. You'd have a hard time finding someone who's still walking on their own that can tell you about that kind of war. And Steve says, temper that. Some of that generation also killed off pensions and told us 491ks. I think he meant 401ks were our future. That's a whole nother conversation, Steve, that revolves around the weak men that infect our stronger groups. and that's a whole other conversation that I don't have time to get to today, but is a good one that you brought up. In fact, okay, no, I got to set that aside, or I'll get distracted from the primary point. What concerns me is this: as we develop through these cycles, the good times, the next set of good times is so much better than the last set of good times that when the weak men that are resultant from those good times, right? So the good times are so good that we create a world where men can do intellectual work instead of physical work. And there's a place for it, and there's a value to it, right? But the problem with that intellectual work, with the academic work, is because it is so physically undemanding, it becomes attractive to men who are not just physically weak and averse to doing honest labor. They're totally weak because they have had, in their aversion to physical labor, they have encountered no substantial adversity against which to hone themselves, and so their minds have neither been sharpened, and they just, well, that's what results in what we now know as modern academia, right? So for a long time now, we've seen the next set of good times be so much better than the last set of good times that it's more resilient to the ravages of weak men. And so the next set of bad times is not as severe as the prior set of bad times, right? So the boom cycle from the .com explosions in the 90s, for example, created so much wealth that even when it was obliterated by just bubbles, economic bubbles popping, the result, while bad, while measurable, while metrically terrible, still was not the Great Depression. And even the Great Depression was not the Black Plague, etc., etc. But because over that cycle, the weak times, the bad times that are created by weak men, rather, the bad times are not quite as severe. That lesser degree of adversity is a less effective furnace in which strong men are molded, in which strong men are hardened. So the leveling process continues. And you have good times, bad times, not much better good times, not as bad, but still bad times. And it just gets more and more tapering off, so that the good times and the bad times start to look a lot more similar over time, right? Right now is our times right now, our economy, our general standard of living, our general level of actual liberty is not as good right now as it was while Donald Trump was in office. And that's something that even people who want to deny it cannot deny they're suffering from. I don't care how hardcore burned down in their TDS a Democrat voter is, they're not happy about paying twice the gas. They're not. And they may even lie to you and say they are. They're not. But that difference is not nearly as stark as many differences in the past. And so the response, the rebuttal, the pushback is weaker. So eventually, the trend reverses, and the next set of good times will not be more resilient to weak men than was the previous set of good times. So over that period, we end up getting to where the socialist utopia becomes the inevitable result of the course of evolution. It almost, kind of the theory I'm developing with this is we had evolution and a peak into devolution. So over time going forward, we will see the economy get weaker and weaker and weaker until either it collapses entirely and is replaced on the other side of a dramatic world war, which may be the end of the current turning in 2028, somewhere right around 2028. Or it may be a can that gets kicked down the road a few years or a few decades. But the eventual result is that the leveling process takes us to a place where the good times and the bad times are indistinguishable from one another, as are the strong men and the weak men, until such a point that everyone is perfectly, completely equal, because they are all equally and entirely impoverished. So that is where I'm going to put a pin in this episode. Tomorrow, Cameron should be back, and we're going to continue a little bit of this conversation because it actually dovetails nicely into what's been going on with rise in certain types of racial hate crimes and the cancellation of Douglas Adams and Dilbert, which, if you guys aren't tracking on that story, it's going to be fun, and it's something that I cannot wait to discuss on air with Cameron. And Legion, if you pick this up in the replay later, you're not going to want to miss it tomorrow, brother. And yeah, so tomorrow's Thursday, and we'll see you then. Thanks for watching. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Steve has corrected me. Steve's right. My bad. Douglas Adams passed away. Douglas Adams was the genius author that gave us The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, among other absolute classic science fiction comedies. Scott Adams was recently canceled. My bad. Thanks for looking out there, Steve. Love you guys. See you tomorrow.